Miss Eleanor Hart had never imagined her life would shrink to a single carpet bag, a worn pair of boots, and a teaching certificate growing soft at the edges from being handled too often. Yet that was all she had left when she stepped off the rickety stagecoach into the dusty, wind-scraped town of Red Creek. The place looked like it had been carved out of stubborn earth and held together by raw hope, a crooked line of wooden storefronts, a saloon whose doors swung as lazily as a drifting tumbleweed, and a church that leaned the slightest bit to the left, as if too tired to stand straight. Eleanor felt the gazes on her before her boots even touched the ground, curious, assessing, uninterested, all at once. Red Creek wasn't the sort of town that welcomed strangers easily, especially strangers with no money, no family, and no one expecting them. She pressed a hand to her hat to keep it from blowing off in the dry wind and squared her shoulders. She may have been trembling on the inside, but no one needed to see that. Her plan had been simple. Arrive. Introduce herself to the town school board. Secure the teaching position she had been promised by letter and find a room to rent. But simple plans often died quick deaths on new soil. The moment she reached the small schoolhouse, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin, she knew something was wrong. The door was locked. The windows were dark. And the sign that read Red Creek School had fallen halfway off its nails. She knocked anyway, hoping someone would answer. No one did. Instead, a middle-aged woman carrying a basket of laundry paused on the dusty road. Her brow furrowed, her expression somewhere between sympathy and annoyance. "You must be the teacher," the woman said with an exhale, as though that already explained something unfortunate. "I am," Eleanor replied, forcing a hopeful smile. "Miss Hart, I wrote weeks ago and was told that we needed a teacher." The woman interrupted with a shrug. "We did. But Mr. Carter, who handles the schooling, left town last week. His brother took sick out in Kansas. School's closed until further notice." Eleanor felt the words like stones dropping into her stomach. "Closed? But—" "The job, no job," the woman said gently, though her tone carried the finality of a shut door. "And no lodging either, I'm afraid. Folks don't have spare rooms these days. Bad harvest season." Eleanor managed a thank you, though her voice was thin. The woman walked on, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the street that suddenly felt 3 times wider and far less welcoming. She gripped the handle of her bag tighter, her knuckles whitening. She had nowhere else to go. No savings. No family. She had come here because it was the only place still hiring. Now it seemed even that hope had dried up. Her mind scrambled for options, writing another letter to the district, begging for temporary work, offering to tutor children for coins or meals, but each idea felt fragile. She looked up at the empty sky, blinking hard against the pressure building in her chest. "Do not cry," she told herself. Red Creek did not look like the kind of town that forgave tears easily. She started walking, mostly to keep from sinking into despair. Her boots carried her past the general store, past the saloon where cowboys lounged against the railing, eyeing her with unfamiliar interest, past the livery where a stable boy paused mid-brush to stare openly. Everywhere she went, people watched her like a puzzle piece dropped into the wrong box. By noon, she had circled the entire town and found no room to rent, no job to take, no place to sit except the steps outside the closed schoolhouse. She set her bag down beside her and folded her hands in her lap. She wasn't sure how long she sat there. Long enough for shadows to shift and the wind to grow colder. She needed a plan. She needed a miracle. That was when the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the ground like distant thunder. She looked up. A tall man on horseback approached with the steady confidence of someone who belonged to every inch of land beneath him. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but she could see the worn leather of his saddle, the dust on his boots, the ease with which he held the reins. He rode like the world never surprised him. When he stopped in front of her, she straightened instinctively. "You the teacher?" he asked, his voice deep, carrying a hint of gravel and a trace of something gentler under it. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, or I was meant to be." The cowboy studied her quickly, quietly, completely, without making her feel inspected. "Town board said the school shut down, so I've been told." She tried to smile, though exhaustion tugged at its corners. "It seems I arrived too late." "Or right on time," he murmured, almost to himself. She frowned softly. "I'm sorry?" The cowboy dismounted with a fluid motion, dust swirls rising around his boots when he landed. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes the color of warm earth. There was a worn sadness in the lines of his face, but also something unbroken, something resolute. "Name's Colt Maddox," he said. "I've got a ranch half a day's ride from here." She waited, uncertain why he had sought her out. "I heard the teacher was coming," he continued, "and I hoped maybe, just maybe, you'd fit the bill." "For what?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, the wind brushing past them like a whisper. "For helping my sons," he finally replied. "They need learning. They need guidance, and—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "They need a mother around the house again." Eleanor's pulse stuttered. She wasn't sure she'd heard him right. Before she could ask, he added, "And you look like someone who needs a home." The wind stilled. The world narrowed to just the two of them standing on the schoolhouse steps in the fading light. For the first time since arriving in Red Creek, Eleanor Hart felt something other than fear. She felt the first quiet stirrings of fate. Colt Maddox hadn't meant to speak so plainly. He was a man who measured his words like water in a dry season, carefully, sparingly, never letting more slip than he intended. But standing in front of Miss Eleanor Hart, with her weary eyes and brave posture, something inside him loosened. Maybe it was the sight of her sitting alone outside the shuttered schoolhouse, trying so hard not to let the world see her disappointment. Maybe it was the memory of his two boys, Samuel and Thomas, waiting back at the ranch with questions he had no answers for. Or maybe it was simply that some moments in life demanded honesty, even from a man who'd built walls higher than his barn roof. Eleanor, for her part, could only stare at him. His words echoed in her mind like they'd been spoken in a canyon. "They need a mother again. And you look like someone who needs a home." She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Mr. Maddox, you can't mean what you just said." "I do," he replied, his tone steady, his gaze unwavering. "But you don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you came here for honest work. I know you're standing in the middle of a town with no job, no lodging, and a sun going down real fast behind you. And I know my boys are growing up wild without a woman's hand around the place. That's plenty to know for now." The blunt truth of it struck her harder than she expected. He wasn't wrong. Still, she took a breath, composing herself with a dignity she refused to lose. "You're suggesting I marry you? Just like that?" Colt shifted slightly, not uncomfortable but cautious. "Not just like that," he corrected. "I'm asking you to consider it." Eleanor's heart thudded against her ribs. Marriage was not a small step for anyone, much less a woman who had just arrived in an unfamiliar town with no prospects left. But she forced herself to focus. "Why not hire a governess instead?" she asked. "Or a housekeeper? Or, because what they need isn't just someone to cook or clean or teach," Colt interrupted quietly. "My boys lost their mother 2 years ago. Since then, they've been adrift, angry, confused. They need steadiness. And a home needs 2 parents if it's going to hold strong." His voice softened, just barely. "I've done what I can. But some things a father can't fix alone." Eleanor felt something twist inside her. She could imagine 2 little boys motherless, hurting, uncertain of the world looking to their father for answers he could not give, but this was still a dangerous proposition. Marriage was supposed to be built on affection, shared hopes, maybe even love someday. Not necessity. Not desperation. "You're asking me to join my life to yours out of convenience," she said, more gently than she intended. Colt nodded once. "Yes, but not only convenience." A small gust of wind tugged at the ends of her hair as he continued. "Look, Miss Hart, I ain't a man who plays games or pretends at things I don't feel. You deserve the truth. I'm lonely. And my boys are lonely. We've been trying to patch together something like a life ever since my wife passed, but the holes are too big." He paused before adding, "And you look like someone who's been living out of a suitcase for too long." The comment wasn't cruel. It was painfully accurate. Eleanor swallowed hard. "I don't want charity." "It ain't charity," he said firmly. "It's a bargain. I offer you shelter, food, a family, and the chance to teach my boys. You offer us guidance, care, and maybe a little warmth in a house that's been cold for a long while." Eleanor looked down at her gloved hands, twisting them in her lap. She thought of nights spent praying for a fresh start, for a place where she mattered. She thought of the empty schoolhouse door, the locked windows, the faces in town that had nothing to offer her. And then she thought of 2 children waiting for a mother who would never return. "This is madness," she whispered. "Maybe so," Colt agreed. "But life don't always hand us things in the way we expect. Sometimes we gotta take what's offered and shape it into something good." She studied him, his posture, his eyes, the steadiness in his voice. Colt Maddox wasn't a reckless man. Everything about him spoke of discipline, restraint, and quiet strength. If he was making such a bold proposition, it wasn't lightly. Still, she needed clarity. "What exactly are you asking of me?" He took a slow breath. "I'm asking you to come back to the ranch with me. No pressure for an answer tonight. You'll have a room of your own. You'll meet Samuel and Thomas. You'll see the place. And after a few days, if you think we can make something workable between us, then we talk about marriage." Eleanor exhaled shakily. It wasn't the impulsive proposal she feared. He was offering time, space, a chance to know the boys, the land, the life she'd be stepping into. "And if I refuse?" She asked quietly. "Then I'll ride you back into town, make sure you get somewhere safe for the night, and by morning I'll try to think of someone else who might help us." He meant it. She could tell. He wasn't a man who would force anything, not affection, not gratitude, not obedience. But she also heard the unspoken truth. He had no one else. She was the first flicker of hope he'd had in a long while. And she hadn't had anyone offer her a place in years. Eleanor looked up at the sky. The sun had dipped low, painting the horizon in pinks and fading gold. Night would fall soon, and with it, the bite of cold that seeped into bones and hope alike. "I'll come," she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Not to promise marriage, but to see your home. And your boys." Colt's shoulders eased relief, not triumph. He nodded respectfully. "That's all I'm askin." He took her bag without waiting for permission, securing it to his horse. Then he extended a calloused hand to help her up. Eleanor hesitated only a second before placing her palm in his. It felt like placing her future into the hands of fate. And for the first time since stepping into Red Creek, she didn't feel alone. The ride to Colt Maddox's ranch was long, but not unpleasant. Eleanor sat carefully behind him on the saddle, her hands resting lightly at his sides so as not to seem presumptuous or uncomfortable. Colt rode with steady ease, as if his body and the horse's movements were one. The prairie stretched wide around them, rolling grasslands, scattered cottonwoods, and distant purple hills melting into dusk. The wind carried the scent of sage and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. Birds wheeled overhead. It was a landscape both lonely and breathtaking, and Eleanor felt swallowed by it, insignificant yet strangely held. For the first hour, neither spoke. Colt wasn't a man who filled silence. And Eleanor, overwhelmed by the gamble she had just taken, didn't trust her voice not to tremble. Her mind kept circling the same questions. What am I doing? What if this is a terrible mistake? What if I disappoint his boys? What if I disappoint him? But beneath all her uncertainty sat a quieter, deeper feeling hope. A fragile thing, but warmed out as the sky dimmed into twilight, Colt finally broke the silence. You ridden all right? He asked without looking back. Yes, Eleanor replied. I'm fine, just thinking. Figured as much. His tone held no judgment. A woman doesn't change the course of her life in an afternoon without thinking hard on it. Eleanor let out a soft exhale close to a laugh, though weighed with nerves. You make it sound as if I'm brave. But the truth is, I didn't have many options. Options don't make a person brave, Colt said. Choosing one path and moving forward anyway, that's where courage lives. She didn't answer, but his words stitched a small patch onto the frayed edges of her heart. They reached the ranch as night folded itself over the land. Lantern light glowed from the porch of a sturdy farmhouse, aged but well kept, with a wide porch and a roof patched more than once by a man who did his own repairs. A barn stood nearby, the low shapes of cattle visible in fenced pastures. The place smelled of hay, horses, and hearth smoke. It felt lived in. It felt like a place where children had once laughed. Colt helped her down from the horse just as the front door creaked open. Two small figures peered out, one just a bit taller than the other. There they are, Colt murmured, his voice softening in a way Eleanor hadn't heard yet. Samuel's the older one. Thomas is 7. The boys stepped into the lantern glow. Samuel, perhaps 9 or 10, stood stiffly, arms crossed, assessing her with guarded eyes the same deep brown as his father's. Thomas hid partly behind his brother, his expression wary, his hair tousled as if he'd been in bed before curiosity pulled him to the porch. Evenin'. Boys, Colt said gently. This here is Miss Hart. She's a school teacher. Samuel's eyes flicked to Eleanor. School's closed, Colt nodded. I know. She's come to stay with us a while. Thomas peeked around his brother again. Why? Eleanor opened her mouth, but Colt answered first. Because our home could use an extra pair of hands and a good heart. Thought Miss Hart might help with your lessons and other things. Samuel didn't look convinced. His gaze hardened slightly, fear wearing the mask of anger. We don't need help. Eleanor knelt so she was eye level with them, careful not to crowd their space. Everyone needs help sometimes, she said softly. I know I do. The younger boy blinked, startled by her honesty. The older boy's gaze wavered, the edges of his stubbornness cracking, but the silence that followed grew heavy, even painful. Colt cleared his throat gently. Why don't we let Miss Hart get settled? She's had a long ride. He guided Eleanor inside. The house smelled faintly of pine and something warm, maybe stew, that had simmered earlier. The furniture was simple, a worn leather sofa, a wooden table scratched by years of use, and a large fireplace where embers glowed faintly. But what struck Eleanor most were the signs of absence. A shawl neatly folded on a chair, clearly untouched for years. A small framed painting of a woman with gentle eyes. And 2 pairs of children's shoes left carelessly by the hearth. Everything felt paused in time. Colt led her to a small room down the hall. Ain't much, he said quietly, but it's yours if you want it. Eleanor stepped inside. The bed was plain but clean, the dresser polished, the window looking out over a stretch of moonlit pasture. It felt like a room someone had prepared hurriedly but with care. It's lovely, she said truthfully. Colt nodded once. I'll let you rest. Boys'll be up early. They take a bit to warm up to new folks. He hesitated at the doorway. Don't be discouraged." "Thank you," she said, her voice warm but tired. "For bringing me here. For trusting me." Colt met her gaze with quiet earnestness. "I reckon trust is something we'll have to build from both sides." He paused, then added gently, "Good night, Miss Hart." "Good night, Mr. Maddox." But sleep did not come quickly. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her folded hands. The house felt too still, too lonely, like a soul waiting to be soothed. She wondered what Colt had been like before grief hollowed him. She wondered what the boys remembered of their mother. She wondered if she would ever be enough for any of them. Her thoughts drifted until soft footsteps creaked outside her door. She hesitated, then quietly opened it. Thomas stood there in his nightshirt, clutching a little wooden horse. His eyes were shy, but not frightened. "Not anymore, Miss Hart," he whispered. Eleanor knelt. "Yes, sweetheart?" Are you gonna leave too?" The question nearly broke her. She touched his cheek gently. "Not tonight," she whispered. "And not tomorrow either." Thomas nodded, leaning briefly into her hand before darting back toward the boys' room. Eleanor closed her door, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She had come here searching for a place to belong. She hadn't known that too. Little boys and their grieving father were searching for the same thing. Eleanor woke before dawn, not because she had slept well, she hadn't, but because the same nerves that had kept her awake now pushed her to her feet. She wanted to make a good impression. She wanted the boys to see her as something other than an intruder. And she wanted Colt to know she meant every word of her promise. She wouldn't run. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and stepped into the hallway just as the first amber light of morning slipped through the windows. The house was quiet, save for faint clattering in the kitchen. The smell of breakfast drifted through the air, eggs maybe, and something frying in a pan. Colt stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, ponytail loose, his expression focused. He didn't look like a man who belonged in a kitchen, but evidently he spent enough time there to manage. He glanced back when he heard her. "Mornin'," he said, giving her a nod. "Didn't expect you up this early." "I wanted to help," Eleanor said gently. A hint of surprise flickered across his features before he stepped aside. "Help's always welcome." She moved to the counter without hesitation, tying an apron around her waist. The gesture felt old and familiar, like slipping into a memory she'd never lived. She whisked eggs quietly, listening to the soft rhythm of breath and skillet. After a few minutes, Colt spoke. "Boys'll be down soon. Samuel gets grumpy when he's hungry. Thomas, well, he's just Thomas." There was affection in his tone, a deep, aching love that made her chest tighten. "I'll do my best with them," Eleanor said softly. "No one expects more than that." Colt paused, then added in a quieter voice, "Just be patient with Samuel. He's got more walls than a fortress." She nodded, though the thought made her anxious. A sudden thumping overhead broke the stillness. Footsteps, followed by the thud of something dropped. Then 2 sets of feet pounded down the stairs. Thomas entered first, clutching his wooden horse again. His cheeks were still round with childhood, his hair sticking up in every direction. He beamed shyly when he saw Eleanor. "Good mornin'," she said kindly. "Good mornin'," he echoed, voice small but pleased. Samuel followed, moving slower, shoulders tense, eyes guarded. He looked older today, not in age but in weight, like someone who had seen more loss than a child should. He slid into his chair without a word. Eleanor placed plates before them, careful not to hover. Thomas thanked her immediately. Samuel did not look up. She sat across from them, folding her hands in her lap. The air stretched tight with silence. "Boys," Colt said gently, "Miss Hart's going to help around the house for a spell. Maybe with lessons too." Samuel stabbed at his eggs. "We don't need lessons." Colt's jaw tightened, but Eleanor touched his arm lightly, signaling him to let her handle it. She looked at Samuel. "Would you tell me what you're reading right now?" she asked softly. His fork paused. "I'm not reading anything," he muttered. "That's all right," she replied. "Maybe you could help me pick a book from the shelf later. Something we could read together." Samuel's eyes flicked to hers, a flash of conflict, suspicion, yearning. But he didn't answer. Thomas leaned forward eagerly. "Can we read too? Can you read stories? Mama used to read stories." Samuel shot him a sharp look, but Thomas shrank only a little. Eleanor smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart. I'd love to." Thomas's grin returned, warm and bright as sunlight. Samuel stood abruptly. "I'm done." He hadn't eaten even half. Colt sighed quietly. "Sam, I said I'm done," the boy insisted, then marched out the back door. The slam made the windows rattle. Colt dragged a hand down his face. "Sorry about that." "Please don't apologize," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "He's hurting." "I understand that." Colt looked at her with quiet gratitude, a look that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. Later that morning, Eleanor found Samuel outside near the barn, throwing rocks at a fence post with steady, angry force. She approached slowly, careful not to invade. "Samuel?" she said softly. He didn't look at her. "Go away." "I will," she said gently, "if that's what you truly want. But I hoped you'd let me speak for a moment." He froze, then shrugged stiffly. "Fine. Talk." Eleanor stepped closer, stopping several feet away. "I know I'm not your mother," she said, "and I would never try to replace her." Samuel's shoulders twitched. "But I am someone who cares," she continued, "and I'd like to help if you'll let me." A sharp breath escaped him. "You don't even know me." "You're right," she whispered. "Not yet. But I'd like to." He hurled another stone, breathing hard. "Everyone leaves. Mama left. And now you're gonna leave too." His voice cracked. Pain spilled through the spaces between words, like a wound reopening. Eleanor's own heart fractured. She knelt in the dirt beside him, not too close. "I won't leave today," she said softly. "Or tomorrow. Or the next day. That's all I can promise for now." Samuel turned away, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "That's not enough." "It's what I have," she admitted, "but I'll give you all of it." Silence stretched, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was heavy. Honest. After a long moment, Samuel whispered, "You can read with us later. If you want." Eleanor's breath released slowly. "I'd love to." He nodded once, then took off toward the barn, his posture less rigid than before. Eleanor stayed kneeling a moment longer, letting the rising sun warm her face. Behind her, the ranch hummed with life horses stamping, cattle lowing, the wind whispering through tall grass. And inside her, the faintest sense of belonging began to bloom. That evening, the three of them, Eleanor, Samuel, and Thomas, sat together on the sofa with a lantern glowing softly beside them. Eleanor read aloud from a worn adventure book she'd found on the shelf. Thomas leaned close, rapt, while Samuel sat stiffly but listening. By the second chapter, Samuel's head inched a little nearer. By the third, he forgot to pretend he wasn't enjoying it. Colt watched from the doorway, arms folded, eyes soft in a way she'd never seen. When their gazes met, something warm passed between them, a silent understanding. "This is working," his eyes seemed to say. "You're bringing something back to this home." And Eleanor felt it too. The shadows in the Maddox house were beginning to thaw, not because she was extraordinary, but because she was present, and sometimes that was enough to start healing. The next few days unfolded gently, never perfect, never without challenge, but with a rhythm that felt more like belonging than anything Eleanor had experienced in years. She woke with the dawn. She cooked with Colt in easy, companionable silence. She read to Thomas while he clutched his wooden horse with quiet devotion. She coaxed small conversations from Samuel, who no longer glared every time she entered a room. And in the evenings, when the boys finally surrendered to sleep, she and Colt sat on the porch under the vast star-poured sky. Speaking little but feeling much, the ranch, once cold and echoing with absence, began to breathe again. The boys laughed more. The walls seemed lighter. Even Colt's shoulders settled as if the weight he carried had shifted from unbearable to merely heavy. But the real test came. On the 6th day, Colt returned from the far pasture late in the afternoon, leading a limping horse. The moment Samuel saw the injury, he broke into tears, raw, panicked tears that seemed to come from a much deeper wound than simple fear for an animal. Colt knelt beside his son, wrapping him in an arm that shook only slightly. "Easy, Sam. He'll be all right. Just stepped wrong on a gopher hole." But Samuel pulled away, face tight as a fist. "No, he won't. Everything breaks. Everything goes away." His eyes were wild, terrified, and Eleanor understood. This wasn't about the horse. This was about the night his mother died. About the helplessness he had swallowed for 2 years. About the world he no longer trusted not to shatter beneath him. Eleanor stepped forward slowly. "Samuel," she whispered. He turned to her, breathing hard. "You're gonna leave too?" "I know it." The certainty in his voice pierced her. "No," she said softly. "I came here to stay." "People say that," he snapped, tears streaking his dusty cheeks. "Mama said she'd get better." "She didn't." Colt closed his eyes at the blow, pain crossing his face like a shadow. Eleanor knelt so she could look Samuel in the eyes. "Your mother didn't leave you by choice," she said. "And I'm not comparing myself to her. I can't, but I'm here. And I'm staying. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose to." Samuel shook his head, but the fight was draining from him. Fear leaving only exhaustion behind. "I don't believe you," he whispered. "I know," she replied gently. "But someday I hope you will." And she opened her arms, not demanding, just offering. It took Samuel 10 long, trembling seconds before he crumpled forward, burying his face in her shoulder. Eleanor held him, her hand moving slowly over his back. Steady as a heartbeat. Colt watched them with something like awe. Later that night, after Samuel was finally calm and asleep beside Thomas, Colt found Eleanor on the porch. She was sitting on the steps, head tilted up toward the thick quilt of stars. He stood quietly beside her for a moment, before speaking. "You didn't have to stay with him like that," he murmured. She looked up at him. "Yes, I did. He hasn't let anyone hold him since—" Colt swallowed. The words didn't come easily. "Since we lost her." Eleanor nodded, sympathy soft in her gaze. "He's a strong boy, but he's afraid his world will break again." Colt sat beside her. His voice, when he spoke again, was rougher, lower. "I'm afraid of the same thing." Eleanor's breath caught. He turned toward her. The lantern behind them cast half his face in shadow, half in gold. His eyes quiet, steady, warm, held hers without wavering. "I told you when I brought you here that I wanted to see if something could work between us," he said slowly. "I meant that. But I also wanted you to have time. To be sure." She nodded. "I have been thinking. Every day." "And?" he asked, voice quiet but taut with hope. Eleanor looked out over the pasture, the moonlight turning the grass silver. She thought of the boys' laughter, the sound of Colt's boots on the wooden floorboards, the gentle creak of the rocking chair she'd taken to reading in. She thought of the first moment she'd arrived alone, scared, and the moment Thomas had asked if she would leave him too. When she spoke, her voice trembled, but not with fear. "I was searching for a place to belong," she said. "And your home feels like the first place that has ever truly wanted me." Colt exhaled slowly, a man bracing himself for something he desperately wanted but wasn't sure he deserved. She turned back to him, her hands folding in her lap. "If you still want me here, I would like to stay." A soft wind stirred the prairie grass, as if nature itself held breath at her words. Colt didn't touch her at first. He was too careful a man, too respectful. But the relief that washed across his face was unmistakable. "Eleanor," he murmured, her name sounding almost reverent on his tongue. "I want you here more than I've wanted anything in a long time." Her heart fluttered. He reached into his pocket slowly, almost shyly, and withdrew a small silver ring, simple, unpolished, clearly crafted by hand. "I've had this since before my wife." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Not because I meant to replace her. I never thought I could. But because I hoped someday the boys might have another woman in their lives. Someone who'd help raise them. Someone kind." He swallowed. "Someone like you." Eleanor's breath left her. Colt took her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I ain't a skin for perfection," he said. "I ain't a skin for love, not yet. I'm a skin if you'd marry me. And let the rest come in its time." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. She thought of Thomas's small hand in hers, of Samuel's trembling trust, of Colt's quiet strength, and she realized she was no longer afraid. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." Colt closed his eyes, a breath escaping him like a long-held weight finally releasing. When he opened them, the gentleness in his gaze made her chest ache. He slid the ring onto her finger, not perfectly sized, but perfect in meaning. Inside the house, the boys slept peacefully. Outside, the stars shimmered like scattered hope. And between them, Colt and Eleanor, something new bloomed. Not desperation, not convenience, a beginning. One built on choice, on gentleness, on slow-growing affection. A family forged not from what was lost, but from what they dared build together.